Well, welcome. I'm excited to talk about sea kayaking. It's one of my favorite things to share information and knowledge about activities we can do here in the Pacific Northwest. We're very fortunate to live in such a beautiful place that has great opportunities to use kayaks and do self-propelled high adventures and challenge yourselves a little bit. But it's a little bit easier than, say, backpacking because you aren't carrying the weight of your gear on your back. The weight of your gear is being borne by the water in the boat. So I'm here to share with you tonight a few information, some tips, and some ideas that maybe help prepare you a little bit better for sea kayaking in the San Juan Islands, or some groups actually go up to Ross Lake up in the North Cascades. So we live in a place where sea kayaking is pretty safe. Pretty benign. There's really not a lot of hazards out there. There aren't too many significant dangers, to be quite honest, that we face in the Pacific Northwest. If we were living in northern Australia, there's 21-foot saltwater crocodiles that actually people paddle in those waters. I'm not exactly looking forward to meeting a crocodile someday. If we were off the northern California coast, out in the Farallon Islands, off the San Francisco Bay Area, there's great white sharks that inhabit that water because there's elephant seals that they like to eat. Fortunately for us, we don't have too many issues with great white sharks in Puget Sound because orcas will eat them. And so because we have orcas, we don't tend to have great white sharks. So we really don't have a lot of environmental hazards in the Northwest, other than one significant one. And that significant one is actually the temperature of the water that we actually paddle on. The water that you'll paddle on in the Northwest, whether it's on Ross Lake or whether it's up in the San Juan Islands, is quite cold. It's what doctors consider water below about 69 to 70 degrees to be kind of the threshold for what they consider to be medically cold. Of course, any water below 98.6 is going to be robbing heat from your body. But below about 70 degrees is a significant hazard and challenge to your body. And so we need to talk a little bit about that, the effects of cold water on a human body. And I'm going to go ahead and share with you what the water temperature is in the San Juan Islands in the summertime. It's about 54 degrees. So it's significantly colder than 70 degrees. So it definitely is a significant hazard. And there's a doctor, his name is Dr. Ginsberg, and he's out of the University of Manitoba up in Canada. People call him Dr. Popsicle. And he's an expert in human physiology and how cold water affects humans. And he actually has a website that you can visit, and he also has videotapes that you can buy. And he has a tape called Cold Water Boot Camp, and then he has one with a little bit more advanced information called Beyond Cold Water Boot Camp. And if you're a leader of youth groups, I highly recommend you visit his website as well as potentially obtain these DVDs for training purposes. Another really good layman's book is a book published by the Mountaineers called Hypothermia, Frostbite, and Other Cold Injuries. And there's a whole chapter in here on acute hypothermia, which is immersion hypothermia caused when you're in cold water. So I'm just going to share with you a little principle that Dr. Ginsberg teaches called the 1-10-1 principle. And the 1 principle is 1 minute. It's actually 1 to 3 or 4 minutes around here. But it's the first effect that's going to happen on a human body when it hits cold water if it's not properly clothed and prepared for. The 1 principle is the very first thing that happens when a person's immersed in cold water and they're not properly prepared is your body's reaction to that is going to be to do this, to gasp, okay? Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but I can tell you that if you're floating in cold water at this level and you're doing this, do you think that's a pretty hazardous situation? Very hazardous. You could actually intake cold water. If you get cold water going down your lungs, you could cause death almost immediately, pretty close. It's a big deal to try to inhale. And so it's important that you get the gasping under control. Fortunately, most people will settle down within just the first couple of minutes and get it under control. But there's a really important piece of gear that you can have that really helps with that situation. What do you think that piece of gear might be? Well, I'll tell you, it's a life preserver or a life jacket, or we commonly call them PFDs. Stands for Personal Flotation Device, right? Most of you have heard that term before. I like to say not. It stands for Prevents Frickin' Drowning Device, okay? I want that planted in your brains. Wearing life jackets, life preservers prevents frickin' drowning. And so you will be issued a device like this. That'll be a Type 3 personal flotation device that will help keep you afloat and above the surface of the water. That helps with this very first initial hazard of inhaling cold water. Now the second number, the 10, that also referred to what? Referred to about 10 minutes. Or in our case around here, the first 10 to about 20 minutes. And what's happening is your body is going to start shunting blood from your extremities. Meaning it's going to actually, the blood vessels and capillaries are going to actually start to shut down because your body wants to preserve all of your warm blood in your torso region, in your head, your lung, your heart, your liver, your kidneys. This part of your body wants to maintain warm blood here at the expense of your extremities. We have very efficient bodies that try to focus their survival, and so they will actually prevent warm blood from going to your extremities. Now, what do you need these extremities for? Treading water, swimming, various types of activities to do what? Keep your head above the water. What's going to help you in that situation? Personal flotation device, right? Okay? It's going to help prevent drowning. The third, and the more obvious one that most people respond to in cold water is the last one stood actually for 1 hour, 60 minutes. And that's about how long it takes for the first initial effects of immersion hypothermia to take place, which means that in about an hour's time in 54-degree water, you would go unconscious. Is that a big deal? I think it's a pretty big deal to go unconscious on the surface of the water. So what helps you in that situation? A prevents drowning device helps you at that point. And actually you would not succumb to hypothermia in that first hour. It would still take probably another hour or two before you would succumb to it. And what happens to your body is actually cardiac arrest. You have a heart attack, and at that point is what actually kills you and you die. Now, the reason I'm sharing that information with you is not to scare anybody, not to have anybody panic, but I want you to realize that you're not going to die like instantaneously going into the water, okay? There's a lot of time to try to deal with this particular hazard, but you need to be well aware of it. It's a hazard that you need to be thinking about, and we need to prevent it. Fortunately, you'll be using tandem sea kayaks, which are quite stable, very highly unlikely to tip over. In fact, they seldom ever tip over except when people are having fun and games and fooling around and water fighting and doing stuff like that in camp. Oftentimes they'll tip boats over. But generally speaking, when you're actually traveling, they're actually quite safe, stable. Plus, we're going to teach you how to purposely capsize these boats, get back into them in a matter of just 2 or 3 minutes, and then pump the water out with using a bilge pump. And when the water's back out of the boat, and you'll actually get quite warmed up from pumping, and you'll be able to go on your way. So I just want you to be aware of those hazards, that's really, other than that particular hazard, where you're paddling, Ross Lake and the San Juan Islands are relatively pretty safe place to paddle.